If I offered to personally help you get your coloring book idea out of your head and into your hands in the next 30 days, using the exact same process that helped me create and publish my first book in 5 days, then leverage my status as a newly published author to launch and leverage it to create 2 additional income streams in less than 6 months, allowing me to make more money faster than relying solely on one-off book sales on Amazon or Etsy. And I did it with no formal art training or prior design experience. Would you be interested? Hi, my name is Rodney, creator of the Coloring Book Creator podcast. My first coloring book, Never Too Late to Make It Happen, inspired me to launch my first paid membership community and online course and coaching program that has helped over a dozen first-time authors create and publish over 30 titles and counting, while opening the door for a portfolio of additional income streams like launching a subscription box, landing paid speaking opportunities and offline teaching positions, and creating online courses and paid workshops. So the only question is, are you next? If you answered yes, shoot me a text to 415-851-1222. Again, that's 415-851-1222 and says, yes, I heard you on the podcast, and I'll respond within 24 hours with details on how to take advantage of this offer. Talk soon. You're listening to the Coloring Book Creator Podcast, episode 54. And in this episode, I'm celebrating 3,000 downloads, what I've learned, and how you can benefit. Even if you're not thinking about doing a podcast, there are going to be some lessons learned that I'm really excited to share with you, so stay tuned. As you heard from the intro, I just learned a few hours ago that I have 3,000 downloads of the podcast since I launched. So I wanted to talk about what this means to me personally, and what it means in regards to my message as it affects the people that do listen to the show, my audience that I've worked hard to build, and what it means moving forward. First of all, 3,000 downloads may not seem like a lot, considering that I've had the podcast for well over a year. And I want to talk about what has contributed to that, I feel. Also, what I am exploring moving forward with the podcast and continuing with the show. So first of all, I created the Coloring Book Creator podcast as a value add offer. So when I launched the Coloring Book Creator program, the initial iteration of it, which was 2 years ago this month in July of 2024, as I'm recording this, I'm celebrating my 2nd year anniversary. I created this the course as what I call a beta. I wasn't sure if it was going to go over. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I just had an idea for a program that I could put together where I could help someone take their idea, their desire, their interest, their passion, what have you, for creating a coloring book and take it from their head into their hands. And the initial vision for that was to go from idea to in your hands in 30 days. I wasn't 100% certain if I could help everyone pull it off. I know I did my book, which is actually going to be 3 years old this month, Never Too Late to Make It Happen. I had published my book from ideation to finished in about 10 days. So based on my own personal experience, I felt pretty confident I could help someone do it in 30 days. And it turned out to be closer to 45 days. I wasn't that overly concerned about the length of time. I did want to make sure I kept to the promise to get the book done. So that was the initial impetus behind the Coloring Book Creator program. I launched that beta course to get a sense, first of all, could I help someone else get results? Length of time aside. And would I enjoy actually helping people get their books done? And I realized I enjoyed both immensely. I enjoyed seeing someone come with an idea for a book and then supporting and working with them to get the book completed and done and in their hands. That was my vision, and I stuck to that vision. So again, this was in July of 2022. And I found that my students were wrapping up the production of their book. Their books were arriving from Amazon, and I wanted to support them even further. Now, this podcast is actually technically my fourth podcast. I've had three others. I wrote and self-published a book called Ion Marketing. I was a business consultant for photographers back in like 2010, 2011, 2012. And I wrote a book and I created a podcast around that book. Now, that particular podcast was what I called a fixed term podcast, which I never intended for it to be a regular ongoing weekly show. I just recorded chapters of the book as almost like little audio lessons and create the podcast around that. And keep in mind, this was back in 2010 and 11, where podcasting was just starting to pick up steam. It didn't have the traction that it has now. But I was fascinated by doing audio. Again, didn't really want to do a whole lot of videos. I was fascinated by audio. And so I decided to go ahead and test the waters with it. And I enjoyed it. But again, it wasn't anything that I wanted to keep going on an ongoing basis. And then a few years later, I launched a second podcast, kept that one for a short period of time, got a little over ambitious about what I could do in regards to production. So I ended up not keeping that podcast going because I actually overextended myself in regards to how much time I could put into producing the show. And then I started a third podcast. I kept it going for a while, maybe not quite a year. I put the pause on that. I'll be very candid here. I just lost interest in it. I still love podcasting, but I just kind of lost interest in continuing it. But this podcast, the Coloring Book Creator Podcast, was very different because I created the podcast, and the initial concept behind the podcast was to celebrate and promote my students that had gone through my program. And I created the podcast to feature all of them. And I feel that this is why this one I've stuck with longer than the ones in the past. But the initial concept behind this podcast was more to feature what I would call my people. And so I came from a different energy. And so I'm saying this to say there's so many options out there for how we can get the word out about what we do. You know, there's YouTube channels, and you start a blog, or you can do a podcast, or you can be a TikTok media, whatever, sensation, Instagram, this, that, what have you. There's all kinds of ways to get your message out there, to connect with people, to create, I guess, if you will, your brand, what have you. There's all kinds of ways to do that. But at the end of the day, content creation in and of itself can feel, especially when you're not getting a lot of traction, it can feel like you're just talking to the wind. Whether it's video, audio, a combination of the two, or blog or what have you, it can feel like no one's listening to you. And that can be discouraging because when you're trying to build traction for what you've created, and you're trying to get attention, build an audience so that you can eventually offer the things that you're creating for sale, that there are people who have raised their hand and showed interest. But this doesn't happen always overnight. It takes time to find your footing, to find your message, your audience, the thing you're passionate about, the people who are passionate to hear about or read about or watch whatever you're doing. And it can feel like you're sort of throwing spaghetti against the wall. You don't actually know 100% what's going to land if you are struggling with content creation, and more specifically, content creation consistently. If you are focusing a lot on you and what you want out of it, I hope you're finding value in this episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about a special workshop I'm hosting called How to Set Up a Simple One-Page Website designed to help you pre-launch your book as you're creating it. And here's why I'm doing it. So many creative entrepreneurs, unfortunately, make list building a low priority when actually it should be, next to creating your work, one of your highest. Why? Because platforms are changing every second. What's hot right now may be out the window, possibly by the time you finish listening to this episode. But do you know what will never go out of style? Your email list. This is something no one can take away from you. A social media platform or seller can close your account. But with proper preparation and positioning, you can be ready to keep your business going with a simple email. No algorithm worries, no platform freezes. And that's why I created this special workshop. This is not a watch me type training. We are going to be rolling up our sleeves and setting up your first contact list, your one-page website, and a welcome email sequence that will automate. So when a new subscriber gives you their contact info, they'll receive your instant response from you. The bootcamp will conclude with a special bonus workshop where we'll craft your first welcome email sequence with the power of ChatGPT. And the best part, you get to keep lifetime access to the recordings at the end of each session, plus all of my scripts, templates, and checklists. And it's all yours for just a one-time payment of only $97. So affordable for everything you get. Click the link in the show notes for a complete outline and registration link. And even if you can't make it live, if this training speaks to you, register and I'll personally make sure that you have everything you need to create your first one-page website, launch, and grow your email list. Now back to the episode. It's going to be challenging to maintain that level of energy and commitment over the long haul. Because if you're focusing on, I'm creating content or using content marketing as a part of my strategy, and it's not resulting in sales right away, and it's not getting eyeballs on your books and what have you, you've got to really know why you're doing it to maintain yourself and to maintain your energy, your passion, and your enthusiasm. You've got to have that dialed in. Otherwise, it will be too tempting to stop. I'm saying this to say, when you make it about something bigger than yourself and your own self-interest, that, in my opinion, is why I've kept this podcast going, soon to be 2 years, because it's not just about me. I don't do a lot of interviews. I didn't want to create just a strictly interview show, although initially my first founding members of my program, they were all interview based. And actually I have a series that I'm reproducing pretty soon where I've helped a collection of creators create digital planners and now physical planners. So I've expanded my product line coaching around not just coloring books, but also planners, both digital and print, and journals and so on and so forth. And there'll be more things that are coming on soon, which is also going to be impacting, because I'm expanding, it's going to also trickle down and impact even what the name of this podcast is called. Again, I'll talk about that more in a little bit. I want to circle it back to the initial conversation I'm having about focus and consistency. So if you make what you're doing about more than just what you want, you make it about how can I help the person that's listening or watching or reading this? How can what I'm creating content-wise can inspire them? If you can focus on that in your content creation, it's going to help you sustain your momentum to keep going. Now, with that said, I have not been as consistent with this podcast as I'd like to be. I've fallen short in that respect. But I've not allowed too much time to go by in between when I'm posting episodes. I always find myself coming back. My energy, my interest, my enthusiasm is to keeping this show alive and going. I spent some time traveling over the end of last year, from last fall of last year into early this year. And I was still pretty consistent even on the road. But then when I came back to the States, I lost some momentum. And I think it took me a little longer to sort of reacclimate to being back in the States after being gone for so long. I also did a launch of the digital planner program. that one was way bigger than I thought it was going to be. And so I really spent a lot of my time helping onboard the new cohort and getting them the result that I promised. So it wasn't that I was ignoring the podcast. I had my hands full, really. So reacclimating back after traveling on the road for so long, a launch that came kind of out of the blue, I wasn't expecting, that went way bigger than I thought. It was a lot of onboarding and hand-holding and things I had to do to make sure that the people who signed up to work with me, I delivered on the result I promised. So the podcast kind of took a back seat. And now, over the last maybe month and a half, that cohort is now starting to wrap up. It's pretty much wrapped up. And so I'm going to be doing another interview blitz, if you will, of the new members who have created their planners. That's coming up probably in mid-August. Anyway, long story short is that I've been reinvigorated in regards to creating episodes of the podcast. With that said, even though I've not done a weekly show consistently, and while I don't have 30,000 downloads, I have 3,000 downloads, but I'm still proud of that because I did it. I may have had hiatus periods, but this show has never felt like I just lost interest. I've never felt that way, not once. And this is my 4th podcast. At the end of the day, I enjoy creating things that inspire people, creating content that inspires people. And while I can totally get on board with the whole visual thing, with doing things on Instagram or doing things on TikTok or whatever the other platform of choice is, while I can totally get all of that, to me, honestly, talking like this, expressing myself this way, this is my sweet spot. I didn't have an outline for this episode. I saw that I reached the 3,000 download mark, and I felt it was too important for me not to document it. So I fired up the computer and turned on the mic, and I'm talking about it. The ease of this, for me, the flow of this works for me. And I'm saying this also to you listening, is find that flow that works for you. Find that method of expression that works for you. I know there's a lot out there that says you've got to be everywhere and do all the things. You know, you've also got to write, you've got to write a blog, you've got to write a book, and you've got to have a podcast, and now it's got to be video, and you need to be on TikTok and Instagram and all the places and so on and so forth. And when you're trying to find your footing, but more specifically, I'm going to say when you're trying to find your voice and the message that is going to resonate with the people that you actually want to support in the fulfillment of their desire, their dream. You've got to find the thing that's going to work for you, because you will only show up in the space in which you feel most aligned. For me, podcasting feels aligned to my communication style. It's how I like to communicate. It feels right to me. And I get proof of that when people have come back and told me that they listened to my podcast and it inspired them to want to know more about how I can support them. Now, it has not happened as often as I initially hoped it would have happened, meaning that I've got people contacting me all the time wanting to find out about my programs and, you know, how to work with me further. But I will say, even though it's been longer than I thought, it is happening. And what it's done is it's encouraged me to keep going with the podcast, because I am getting clearer about my mission. I'm getting clearer about my voice. I'm getting clearer about who I help and how I help. I'm getting clearer about my message. A lot of times not ever get that intel until you've done something long enough to get the sense of what's working and what's not working. So when you hear, oh, just go do this and this is going to get you all your leads, go do faceless reels, or go start a YouTube channel, or go become the next TikTok sensation, or whatever. All of those things have their place. All of them work, but all of them don't work for everyone. You have to find that communication sweet spot for you. And when I say sweet spot, I mean it works for you and works for the people that will consume your content, that will then connect the two of you together. So the people that I most want to attract are people who enjoy listening to the podcast. Those are the people that I want to connect with because it's how I love to communicate. I'm not going to force myself to do something that maybe would get me a bunch of people interested in me, but if it's not the best way for me to communicate my message, then it's probably not going to be the best fit for me. So I'm saying this to you to say, find what works for you. If it's being on camera, turn on the camera and go for it. If it's being on audio only, do audio only. I know that video right now is the rage and everyone's all excited about video and you got to do video. And, there's a lot of talk about get over yourself about video, what have you. Everyone's got to do what feels right to them. I'm saying to my current cohort in my Coloring Book Creator Society program, doing right now a 30-day challenge where they are creating content and posting it every day. And the thing that I have said to them is I'm more concerned about consistency than perfection. This is about developing a content creation habit, not about everything I post has to hit it out the park. Everything I post has to become viral. Everything I post has to lead to a sale. When you're trying to find that sweet spot, when you're trying to find that method of communication that is aligned with how you and the people you want to attract need to best connect, there is a period where it is going to feel like you're throwing spaghetti against the wall. And it's going to take a minute before you figure out what's working for you and what's working for the people you're trying to get the attention of. But you may not be able to find out what that is if you're not putting out something consistently. So if this is where you are, you're listening to this, I would say you already have a gut check on what's working for you, what's going to be your best way to communicate. You probably already know what that is. But I would just say, if you feel so inspired, test out the other things. Test out, video or images or whatever. Test out different platforms. Test out Instagram. Test, TikTok or whatever. Find your thing and be more committed to that in the beginning than having every single thing you put out there knock it out the park. If writing is your thing, write. Start a blog. Start a newsletter. If audio is your thing, start a podcast. If you don't have an issue being on camera, do video. But this is the one thing I do want to say. Don't allow yourself to get seduced by the hot trend. Like I said, I see a lot out there about the faceless reels. That's a lot of energy around that right now. People are buying into that. I want to make sure I'm being very respectful. I'm not saying that the faceless reels don't work. I personally have not done them enough to be able to say. I just know for me personally, I feel that the people I want to connect with, the people I want to support, they need to hear me. They need to hear my voice. They need to get a sense of who I am by the way I speak, by the topics I pick, the conversations that I have. Because if you listening to this, if we ultimately work together, you're going to be hearing this voice a lot. If you are not liking what you're hearing, what I'm saying and how I'm saying it and how I sound, if you're not connecting with me at this level, you're not going to connect with me on any other level, on a deeper level. I know for me personally, it's important that you get a sense of who I am. And you self-select or self-identify if I'm the person for you. Then if you come to one of my calls, one of my classes, one of my workshops, or what have you that I do, and you decide perhaps to work with me, then you already know my mission is to make sure that you know what you're getting. before you even decide to click on that link or do what have you to get a hold of me, that you and I can speak about working together, possibly more in depth or deeper. So anyway, what I learned from 3,000 downloads is the quantity, the amount means absolutely nothing. It could be 30,000 downloads. If I wasn't enjoying this, if I wasn't feeling like I was putting out content that was of value, if it felt like drudge to me, that every time the idea of having to turn the mic on and record this felt like I would rather go put my hand through a meat grinder than do this, then I wouldn't be doing this. With that said, if I was doing this and nobody was ever saying anything to me about the episodes, they weren't communicating with me that it was resonating with them in any kind of way, what have you, again, I probably would find another way to communicate. So again, while I don't have the thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads, I know that there is an inflection point that happens when someone does something consistently long enough. They show up. I have a phrase that I say to my students all the time. When you find that thing, message, that audience, that communication style that works for you and the people you want to attract, it can feel slow and almost to the point that what you're doing isn't even quote unquote working. I'm doing air quotes. But if in your heart you know it's the right thing for you, you show up until the people who are supposed to be with you, until they catch up. You show up until they catch up. But it only can happen if you know what you're doing is right for you. You are the one that's putting yourself out there on the line, because when the right people, when they do show up, you've got to show up for them even more. And you got to enjoy what you do, how you do it, and who you do it with. And if you did things that felt like you had to drag yourself to do it, and then it feels like when you want to invite someone to work with you and you have to drag them into that. I had a client that said this to me years ago. If you drag them in, you got to drag them around. And life is too short to be doing things and spending time in ways that, quite frankly, don't feel aligned, that don't light you up. Okay. To recap, what I learned from 3,000 downloads of the podcast is, 1, focus on who you want to connect with, spend time with, who you want to support more than what you want for yourself personally in regards to going viral or monetization. Number 2, you need to test a variety of different methods or content creation strategies until you find the one that works for you, the way you most feel naturally aligned to communicate, that equally connects with the audience that you want to spend time with. You must be aligned. If you're not aligned, you're either going to stop because it doesn't feel right to you, or you're going to attract people that you don't enjoy. So it must be aligned. There must be a communication pathway and content creation plan that is aligned for both of you. Number 3, you've got to be consistent. You've got to give it enough time to find that sweet spot. You can't just do something for a day, a week, a month and think that, oh, well, I did this for a month, 2 months, sometimes even 6 months. It didn't work. I'm stopping. And then this goes back to number 1. If you still feel energized and excited and interested and passionate about what you're doing, even when it seems like no one is listening or no one's watching or what have you, if you still feel on some level, some kernel of a sense of rightness about it, consistently keep going. Because there will come a time when it will just go bigger than anything you can imagine, but you can't get there if you stop or you're switching gears every time you turn around, there's some new shiny thing floating through the air now saying that this is the new hot thing and you're over there doing that. You got to stay consistent with something. And I would go so far as to say is to pick one thing. Don't try to be all the things. If it's going to be YouTube, videos, what have you, go all in on videos. If it's podcasting, which I know now podcasting is now sort of transitioning into YouTube because, again, a lot of people are using that platform, then whatever the definition of that is for you, do that. If it's writing, like I said, maybe start a blog, definitely consider writing a book. If it's going to be dealing with people directly, face to face, maybe find places you can go speak, find groups you can go talk to. Business owners are always looking for fresh, innovative ways and engaging ways to bring people into their place of business. So if you're a people person and you like to, be with the people directly and shake hands and meet them and see them eye to eye, face to face, then pursue that. If it's online and there's a lot of people always looking for someone to bring onto their podcast, if it's an audio-based one or on a video-based one, YouTube, people are always looking to collaborate with good quality people that, I always say this, that help them look better to their audience. So if you can help the person you're collaborating with look better to their audience, meaning that you're providing value to their audience, I would be hard pressed to see you not getting booked in places to go and talk. Okay. Don't worry about the numbers. That's number 4. Don't get caught up in vanity metrics. There are people out there who have thousands, I'm talking tens of thousands of followers. We can go look at someone's Instagram. We can go look at someone's Facebook group or someone's, YouTube thing and think, oh God, they've got 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 followers and they've got all the things. And we can think that they're just knocking it out the park. Not necessarily. We don't necessarily know. Yes, they could have a lot of views, a lot of downloads, a lot of listens. But if what they're saying and how they're saying it and who they're saying it to isn't aligned, I can almost guarantee you no one's buying anything from them. They may have a lot of downloads. They may have a whole lot of followers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually selling anything to people. Okay? So do not allow yourself to be seduced by what I call vanity metrics. I am far more interested in quality and the right people coming into my ecosystem than quantity. Quantity means absolutely nothing because if I had 10 times the amount of downloads, but everyone that was reaching out to me, we were not a fit, this would be, in my opinion, not a good thing. This would actually be a fail, in my opinion. I've got to want to do it. I've got to feel aligned, feel excited, enthusiastic. And so when people show up and say, hey, I want to learn more about you and how you can possibly help me, there is, again, an all connection. They've got to hear in my voice when they listen to this show that I am someone that they would want to know more about in regards to how I can help. That's why it's so important to find that sweet spot. The last thing I'll say in regards to moving forward with this, at some point, I'm not exactly sure when, I think I announced it earlier in January because I do feel very, very clear that the podcast is going to be, I don't want to use the word transitioning. It's going to be iterating. I already know what I want to name the rebrand of the podcast. I was going to do it earlier this year. Then I had this launch in March and decided to put the hold on that because I wanted to focus on helping my new students that came on board. But now that's being resurrected again to do the rebrand. So that is going to happen. I'll talk about it more in future episodes. I'm just not exactly sure exactly when that's going to happen. All I will say is I will still be helping people who are interested in going forward produce books, whether they're coloring books, planners, journals, or a combination of the 2 or 3, and even more. As I said, I launched the Coloring Book Creator Program through a mini course that I created. That's really my sweet spot, is education and helping people develop educational based programs around their books and their products. So that is going to be something that's going to be more developed as I move forward. It's a part of a bigger vision I've had now more than 6 years, but I started with the coloring book because that's what I had done. Now, as I'm developing and maturing with who I am, who I'm attracting, who I enjoy working with, how I can empower moving forward, it's time that the Coloring Book Creator brand has to also mature. And so this title of the show and of the program is eventually going to have to mature with where things are going. And I know that. I've known it for a while. I just wasn't sure exactly how I was going to do that or when I was going to do that. So I'm getting clearer about that now. And again, it'll still be me in the ways that I've already shown up. It's just going to be more about growing and maturing and inspiring leaders in the creative space and publishing and creating content that can be monetized through, like I said, publications, be them physical and or digital, and educational based experiences is going to be the cornerstone of what will happen in this new iteration. So again, stay tuned for that. I would love to hear your thoughts about everything I've talked about. Like, where are you in your content creation plan? Where are you with strategizing or even thinking about, and I want to say this one last thing. If you are feeling like I've been doing this for a while, whatever it is that you've been doing, and there's a feeling, a little bit of restlessness going on, you're not quite sure things are, not quote unquote bad. I'm using air quotes again, but they're not 100% with what you're really feeling like you are wanting to express. Don't ignore that. Those feelings that are coming up for you is, to me, tapping you on the shoulder saying that you're growing, you're evolving. And with that, things will need to shift and change. So don't feel like that you're burning they say burn the ships and all of that kind of stuff. You can choose to do what you wish. I would just say, spend some time in reflection. Don't ignore those feelings. Spend some time in reflection, journaling, and maybe find a good book or something that's helping you process what's coming up for you. And again, if it's coming up for you and you're feeling a certain way about things, it's not bad, but it's not great. It's not 100% how you want to be. Don't ignore those feelings. Allow yourself to feel whatever you need to feel and process it, because most likely you're being pushed to go into the next thing, the new direction. But sometimes we can't get there holding on to what we currently have. One of my earlier business mentors says all the time that what got you here won't get you there. I totally resonate with that. I heard this being said for years, and I totally get it. When you're in that beginning phase, you may not even know what here is or what there is. But what I will say is that when you're wanting to grow something bigger, not necessarily for the sake of saying it's bigger, but when you want to grow something, you're going to have to be willing to let go of certain things that are just not aligned with where you're trying to go. And again, just remember that what got you here, whatever it is that you're doing now, will probably not get you where you want to go. But you got to be willing to take stock, do a little inventory, do a little gut check with yourself, and say, I don't know exactly how I'm going to get to the next thing. But one of my favorite books that I'll put the link in the show notes here by, I believe the author's name is Dan Sullivan. The book is called Focus on Who. And I know I'm not saying the title right, but who, not how. When you're ascending to a next level, it's who do you need to connect with? Who do you need to become? Not how do you do it? When you focus on who you need to be, how you need to show up, if you focus on that, the how will take care of itself. But we have to shift the focus from asking ourselves well, I don't know how to do something. You don't need to know how to do something. You just have to get clear about who you need to become and who you need to connect with, because the right people will show up. They will show up. And when they do show up, you got to be ready to move on what they share with you in regards to the how. All righty. So with that said, thank you so much for listening. Thank you if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, or this is the first time you're hearing me, I thank you for giving me your time. And even though there's going to be some changes happening with the podcast, including what it's called, I look forward to the next 3,000 downloads and then some. So with that said, this is Roddy Washington, your host, signing off. And I appreciate you for taking the time to hang out with me today for a little while. See you on the next